Hello, and welcome to the Digital Photo Academy. My name is Asif Raza. In this video, we're going to continue our exploration of some of the tools that are relevant to photography, as we have done in some of the previous videos. Today, we are going to be looking at two of the tools. One, which is the clone stamp tool and the pattern tool. And the next one would be the history brush tool and the art history brush tool. Okay, so what I have done is I've opened an image already. This is simply to kind of demonstrate what the behavior can be. Starting off with the clone stamp tool. When we choose the clone stamp tool, once again, please pay attention to the top options bar. You have the choice of choosing a brush size, the hardness or softness of the brush. So I'm just going to leave it around about 40% hardness. And then you have a whole lot of brushes. So when you click on this little brush icon, which looks like a folder, it'll open up the various brushes. So from a photographic perspective, and we're referring to or talking about using the clone stamp tool to retouch or to replicate a pattern or a part of the image in another space. So here the objective is to first help you understand the behavior of the clone stamp tool. So I'm going to enlarge the brush a little bit. So I'm using the right square bracket on the keyboard to enlarge the brush. What the clone stamp tool wants you to do is take a sample from the area that you wish to copy over into another area. Now, to be able to do that in a non-destructive manner, I have always suggested to work in a non-destructive manner. Go to your layers panel, and currently it's just the background layer over here. So I am going to create a blank layer to demonstrate the behavior, and I also suggest that you should get into the habit of working in a non-destructive manner. I'm going to name this as clone sample layer so that I know exactly what I'm doing. Now, once I do this, I've got to make sure that this is active, current and below, or all layers. To be safe, I'm simply going to say all layers. So if there were 20 layers, and if I'm in the topmost layer, I would be taking a sample from all the 19 layers underneath it. And to take a sample, all you have to do is bring the cursor into the space that you wish to sample, press the Alt or Option key, and your cursor, while you keep the key pressed, should look like a crosshair. So you click in some place and then let go. Now what you'll notice is as you move the brush around, and I'm not clicking the mouse button, it shows me exactly what region I have sampled. Okay, and if I now click and drag it, you can see on the right hand side another sort of a cross, which shows me where the sample is being taken from. And all I'm doing is simply keeping it there, and it is copying it over. Now you can let go of it, and if you pick up in another space, so let's say I now decide to clone this region, so it will comparatively pick on the similar region. So what it has done is it is behaving in what is known as an aligned manner. So whichever was the first sample point and whatever was the first imposition point of your sample cloning, it will retain that relationship and it will follow through. So one of the benefits of keeping things in layer is I can always select and delete, so I have not done any damage to my original layer. So I've deleted that and I'm back in here. But this time I'm going to uncheck aligned. Let's see what happens. So my sample is still there, and I come here and I am copying. And once I had done, I had to let go of my cursor. Now, when I come back, notice that it is still referring to the point of origin where I had taken a sample. And if I tried to sample now, it's overwriting that, and it's behaving in a very, very different manner. So that's the difference between align and non-align. Okay, so keep that in mind. So depending on what you're doing and what you're expecting the behavior to be, play with that. Now at the same time, you also obviously have the various blend modes. You can play with them, and you can have a control over the opacity and the flow of the brush, or the angularity of it. So I'll leave it to 0. And if I were to reduce my opacity, let's say to 24%, so my sample is still here. So now when I lay it on, you will notice that the opacity of this space is fairly low. Whether it is aligned or non-aligned, it doesn't really matter, because the opacity is independent of that. So just for the sake of convenience, I've kept it to align. So it's just like a light 24% opacity brush. Now, if I leave the opacity to 100%, and if I reduce the flow, and let's say I'm again reducing it to 24%, let's see what happens. It's very similar in some ways, but the opacity behavior is slightly different. So the flow determines, literally like a can of paint, you press down on the nozzle gently, the flow is mild. You press down hard on it, the flow is heavier. So work with the combination of these two to get the best possible solution for the work that you are doing. But recognize what the behavior of the clone tool is. Continuing with the clone tool, if we click on the next icon over here, which has the symbol or an icon of a clone, let's see what happens. So it opens up another dialog box, and here there's a bunch of things. So there's different markers, and this says clone source at the top. So Photoshop allows you to create multiple sources. If you are a heavy retoucher, you may want to do multiple sourcing at one time and work on different areas to make sure that everything is balanced, as opposed to working in one space and then going to the next and realizing that you might have overdone or not done enough. So for example, if I come here and I click here, so this has become part of my source 1. So I could go to source 2 and I could take a sample from here, and source 3 I could take a sample from here. So I could create multiple samples, and notice it highlights itself. So I'm in source 3, so this is source 3. I don't want to sample anything again. I go to sample source 1, and guess what? It picks on the original space that I had started off in the first place. Okay, so that's source 1. Source 2 I had sampled elsewhere, so I could work with the source 2 because it had sampled elsewhere, and then I could go to source 3 and work away, and that was sampled down here. And while we are aligned, the first time when we click someplace, that's where it will retain the relationship from. So that's what the behavior is. Okay, with the clone sources. Now if I get rid of that and I go to my source 1 once again, to better demonstrate a couple of other aspects of this clone source panel, I'm going to come into my background layer, and actually I have unlocked it, because what I wish to do is use the crop tool to extend my file using the content aware aspect of it, and I will shortly demonstrate what it is that I'm proposing to do. So now I have applied the content aware with my crop tool. Let's hope, yep, it worked pretty darn well. And what I would like to do now, take my clone tool, which is residing here. I take the clone tool, and I'm going to take a big brush, and let's say I sample something from here. Now if I bring it over, you can see exactly what it is. So traditional behavior would be that I go to my empty layer and I'm checked all layers. So I could literally come and duplicate the whole thing any which way that I want. So to be safe, what I wish to do is actually replicate the entire object space over here, but flipped over horizontally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this flip over. So I check that. Now let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm taking a sample from this region and I'm going to make sure that I line it up over here with the edges so that it looks like as if I have copied it over. So what I am doing now quite effectively is replicating the same object in reverse. I should have changed my flow to 100%. I completely forgot to do that. So that's why the density was not behaving correctly. Okay, so now suddenly I have managed to duplicate the whole thing within a few strokes. And this is in an independent layer, so I can always switch it off and you can see what I have done. Okay, so if I once again select and delete that selection from my sample layer, this time not only do I wish to do this, but I'll also want to flip it vertically. So what happens if I now do a cloning? So obviously, what's the point of it? Because you may want to play with it in a certain way. So I decide, hey, I'm going to start from here and I paint away. I can quite comfortably replicate the whole thing by itself over here. Now, why would I ever want to do this? Now, under normal circumstances, I would rarely do this. But you can use this quite effectively. So just a quick sort of demo for you to better understand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my history and just come back to my original image so that I have the original image available. And this time, for the sake of a better understanding, and I'm going to do a few things here. First, I take the object selection tool and I say select subject. So it has basically done a reasonable selection. I'm not going to bother with being very precise or very accurate at all. I go into my layers panel and I put a layer mask on it. So what it has done is it has stripped the entire object away. Now I'm going to create an empty layer beneath this layer. So you can simply click on the plus symbol and it'll create a layer above which you can then drag down. Or alternatively, what you can do is come to the plus symbol and on the Mac you will press the the command or the Apple key and it'll create a layer directly beneath that. Once I have a layer, what I also wish to do is extend my canvas a little bit, because the objective that I'm hoping to achieve is create a very delicate reflection of the object underneath it as if it was sitting on a piece of glass. So first thing first, I'm going to go into my image. I'm going to change my canvas size. I'm going to constrain it to the top, anchor it to the top, and let's say I'm going to make it into 20 inches. So now I have a lot of negative space in here. For us to be able to better see and understand, I'm going to create another blank layer, and this is just, I'm just going to call it a base color, and I'm going to fill it with a white. So I filled it with a white. And now I come in here, and as opposed to flipping it right to left, I switch that off, but I'm simply going to flip it top to bottom. Okay, take my clone stamp tool, I come in here, and I can come in here and gently paint that from the source. Now, before I do that, because I want a very delicate feel, I'm going to lower my opacity to about 10%, and I make sure that before I begin, I'm kind of lined up with it. So to be safe, I'm going to just take a sample from there. Yeah, it could work. So it's a white base, and I come in here, and I am very gently working that away. Since, don't forget that I have lowered opacity, if I repeat on it, once again, it will become excessive. So the smart thing would be to do it in one simple stroke as opposed to doing multiple strokes, so that you don't get a duality of the whole thing. Now, perhaps I want the reflection to be subtly graded, so I don't want too much. So there are multiple ways of doing that. The first one, the simplest one, perhaps not the best choice, would be that you take the erase tool, which is directly beneath the history brush. And once again, with lowered opacity, extreme softness to the brush, and I'm going to take a large brush and lower the opacity even more to about 16%, I can gently come and start erasing it. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. Now if I don't do that, and I'm going to undo all of that, so I'm back to where I was, what I can do, which is something we'll talk in a later video in greater detail, is actually apply a mask, a layer mask, take a gradient, black to white, and fill this. So black will hide, white will show. So I'm going to start somewhere outside and drag this over. So you notice how nicely it has shaded itself. Now if you want to redo it, I'll bring it further up and do it up to here. So now it's even better, and it looks like a very realistic reflection from the top part. Since there's a mask in here, I've only copied the area of interest that was available to me. I can modify the blend mode. If there was a color texture underneath, it'll show through, or I can further play with the opacity. That is most of what the clone stamp tool is about. There are other things in here which we'll talk about when we actually start working with real images, and then you'll have hopefully a much superior understanding of how to use this tool effectively. Now that we have explored the basic stamp tool, there's a pattern stamp tool as well. Now, the pattern stamp tool is not really relevant to photography unless you are part of a design team or you want to work with composites and things like that. You have the ability of creating your own patterns or take existing patterns. For example, if there's this trees pattern, I take this guy and guess what? Align and 100%, 100%. Well, I'll create a new layer. So I come here. So what kind of impressionist? Sure thing. So I can simply paint that pattern with the pattern tool. Now, what's the point of painting this pattern tool? The point of it is that you can actively paint interesting patterns, create some interesting backgrounds. So I've changed the brush size so my pattern starts to behave differently. So I'm mixing things together, and perhaps this is what I was looking for. I don't know. I'm just saying. And if I bring this farther down, now guess what? My shadow is also happening over here, and I can play with it. So the pattern tool, you can actually create your own patterns or apply your own patterns or do whatever the heck you want. Okay? So another example of this would be that I'm still in the pattern layer. This time, let's say I take one of the water-based pattern. So I'll take the lighter blue one. And I've still got a nice large brush. And I'll paint in here. So as soon as you let go of the brush, things change, and you can change the behavior by choosing the hardness of the brush. And notice as I harden the brush, things have changed. So as you keep painting on top of it, things evolve. And I am now creating a very interesting background. So I could quite easily bring it up to here, and then I say, okay, I am in there. I'm going to blur this a little bit. and I blur it quite a bit actually. There we go. I blurred it, and now what I can do is actually apply a layer mask on it, take a gradient in the layer mask and create a gentle separation from there, or maybe down here. So it's like I've created a base on which my reflection sits, and I can then say, okay, I want a slightly darker, or whatever the heck the screen mode I want. I can go about it, and that's the whole point. So I hope the clone tool and the stamp tool made some sense to you. I will see you in another video where we talk about the history brush tool and perhaps the art history brush tool. Stay well, and I will see you soon. Take care.